I'm very passionate about this place because it still exists, and a lot of places in the lower 48 don't have such expansive wilderness.
It is like no other place on Earth.
It's a place where humans come and they don't remain. And so humans aren't influencing a lot of people to come here. It's nature itself is what I believe, yeah.
It's always a treat because it's always something a little bit different.
So our day starts pretty normal. You wake up, you go to work, but instead of commuting with a car to our office, we commute by a boat to get onto your ship. So we take a little pilot boat and we take it out into the middle of Setaka de Nero, so it's right across from our headquarters in the water. And we see our ship coming and it's looming in the distance and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we end up coming out behind it and we climb up a rope ladder that's dropped down through a hatch, and that's how we get on board. Yeah.
As we sail up through the inlet, one of the most important things that we usually see are the changes in the weather. It's not at all surprising when we arrive earlier in the morning that you will have a little bit of cloud, maybe some fog. It's what we would refer to as a marine layer, and this is because the ocean at that point is warmer than the air temperature, and the cold winds you have sweeping down from the glaciers causes that effect. But the closer we get to the glaciers, the more this has been moved out of the way, and it's why we tend to get a more clear day as our time in Glacier Bay progresses.
The history of Glacier Bay begins long before any explorers came. The Huna Tlingit people used to live in this area. They say they lived in the shadow of a glacier. And when the glacier actually began to advance, they had to flee their homeland. It advanced so far, it came out into Icy Strait, and in about 1794, George Vancouver marked on the map where he saw that ice face. And where we are today, the glacier had actually receded up 65 miles. In only about over 200 years. So it's the fastest known retreat in the world of science anywhere in the world. So this is a really unique place to see glacial healing process of how everything comes back to life.
So from the time we enter into the bay up until the almost 2 hours it takes us to get to the face of Marjorie Glacier, this is how far those glaciers have retreated over the last 200 years. And there are still changes that are happening. We're seeing retreats, advances. It's always a little bit different.
This place, it's different every year because different people come in. There's a seasonal flow of people who live in the area, but more than that, just the wilderness. I've never been anywhere else in the world that you can achieve such wilderness here and feel alone.
For myself personally, I am always amazed at the very simple beauty of it, and it's one of the few places that continues to change just a little bit. I love it for the wildlife. We're going to get the presence of humpback whales, otters, lots of kittiwakes, mergansers, an incredible variety of birds, and occasionally the odd little mountain goat, and maybe even a bear.
We're part of a contiguous unity of 3 other parks in the US and Canada, and it's the second biggest wild protected area in the world and second only to Antarctica. So to come to a place where you can really feel alone and really try to connect with the environment and with nature, it's a really unique opportunity here. And to share the story of change here, that's another, since it's the fastest glacial retreat in the world, you see life change throughout the park. You see a lunar landscape near the glaciers, and you see a forest down in the lower bay. So you see huge changes, you see amazing wildlife, and you can really feel at peace when you're out there.
Why do we have such an abundance of wildlife in this area? Well, it all has to do with the ocean. We tend to think of places when they're warmer as having a much greater food supply, but the opposite of that is true in cold oceanic waters. The colder the water is, the greater the amount of nutrients, and so you have things like the humpback whales are here to feed on the plankton, the krill, the herring. The otters are here to feed on the mussels, clams, sea urchins, and of course there's just so much sort of extraneous food for the birds around that this is why we have such a variety of wildlife here. When John Muir first came and started writing about it, he really encouraged people to, his phrase was, go and see for yourself. Even 100 years ago, we knew this was a very precious, very special place, and it remains that way because it has a very unique niche in our environment. You find a collection of animals and marine mammals and birds that you'll find almost nowhere else in North America, all living in a very harmonious situation.
Well, my first experience in Glacier Bay, I was flabbergasted at the amount of wildlife here and the vastness of it. And I remember summing up my experience after my first summer here. My parents, of course, asked me, like, how was it? And it's hard to put a phrase on it. But to me, I realized that Alaska in general, but especially Glacier Bay because it's so close to me, it's the first place I've ever been where nature still rules. And we're not in charge. And it's its own entity. I think that's a really unique quality.
We see lots of other smaller islands on our way up, and of course this entire landscape has been carved out by the glaciers, and one of the things to look for is you'll notice that the further we sail into the face of the Marjorie Glacier, that the landscape changes dramatically. Near the very front entrance as we come in, this of course is the part that has had the ice retreat for the longest period of time. So we see so many more trees and plants. The plants have an order to which they reappear. We get, well, the very first thing, of course, are algae and lichens that come in, and it takes them a while to establish a soil base so that you will get things such as alder and the cottonwoods, and it's not until much later that you'll see the presence of cedars and sitkas, or spruce rather, and the hemlocks that come along. So you're really seeing the earth in a very regenerative process right now, because the glaciers have come and sort of pushed everything out of the way, and now nature is coming back and basically replanting it.
Margerie Glacier is very unique in the sense that it's a healthy glacier. 95% of our glaciers in Alaska are unhealthy, so they're receding or they're melting, but the Margerie Glacier is holding her own. She's one of the 5% of healthy glaciers. So we not only get to see her calve and break off that ice, but we get to be happy about that because she's able to reinitiate that ice when the snow keeps falling from the Fairweather Mountains, and that's her source. So she's definitely one of the highlights of Glacier Bay because not only is she an active glacier, moves about 6 feet forward through the mountains every day. We get to see enormous calving sometimes. We get to hear the calving. When that ice falls in the water, you get to see the gulls swoop in. There's a lot of energy, a lot of activity happening, even though it's something that's not even alive. And I just think that's a really spectacular thing to see something move like that.
A glacier comes to be a glacier when you have more snow that falls than what melts from one year to another. In fact, we say now that a glacier advances when it continues to get more snowfall from one year to another than it calves away, and it retreats when it receives less snowfall, so it's not able to maintain the density that it has. Most of the glacial ice that we look at is really probably not more than a few hundred years old, because by the time that it's fallen, it comes down, and glaciers do move. They're like these giant pythons of ice that are constantly being pulled along basically by gravity. And so it's always changing, it's always a little bit different.
So Margerie Glacier, she's about 250 feet tall above the water, but a lot of people don't realize that the ice goes below the water, about 100 feet. And she's resting on a platform that she basically created as she bulldozed through the valleys. And then she goes about 21 miles to her source, so she's a really long glacier as well. And she's a mile wide. So when you look at her, you don't think it's that big because there's no reference point. But yeah, it's a pretty large glacier. It is a huge
piece of ice that's in front of us that has been pushed down from the mountainsides heading towards a tidal area, which is why we call these a tidewater glacier, because the water comes up to the glacier and it doesn't just wash up against it. The water is actually eating away at the glacier below it, which you'll find we don't go too close to the face of the glacier, not so much because we're worried about calving actions coming off from the top down, but for something that they call shooting bits of glacier that come from underneath the water surface and will just come rocketing up to the top of the surface.
First time I experienced that in Mardu Glacier with that crashing and falling into the water was from a tour boat. We have a day boat that comes up every day. So they turn off the engines and you hear that crash so loudly. And it was something I wasn't really anticipating because you never hear ice that big crack when you're at home. All you hear is your ice cubes in the ice cube tray. You never imagine that it can have such a reverberating sound. So I just remember standing in silence and just appreciating the fact that we can hear nature speaking.
Calving is a matter of being in the right place at the right time, because what's happened is you have all of this ice that's been pushing down through the mountain areas, and it gets squashed and pushed up against other pieces. So it's not a solid piece of ice any longer. It's been subjected to great stress, and so you're going to get chunks of it that will fall off. Ice, of course, really has no color to it. It is the density of the ice. This ice is so thick and so compacted, it quite literally has had all of the air pushed out of it as layer after layer of snow accumulates and it compresses. And because of this, the light from the visible spectrum that we have as it enters into the glacier, what gets reflected back to us is only the color blue. The red and the other waves are absorbed in that, which is why we perceive it as a blue color.
Well, I'm thankful that we actually are part of the National Park Service. So it is protected and will be protected. And this is the 50th year of the Wilderness Act, and it protects this land indefinitely to remain wilderness. So I love to think that what happens to Glacier Bay is chosen by Glacier Bay. It's not anybody that's going to influence or build roads or trails. There aren't even trails out there. It's completely void of human influence. So who knows what nature is going to do? I guess time will just have to tell.
What to me is so impressive, and to keep in mind that when we're looking at this, we look at planet Earth and it looks like there's so much water available. And in fact, out of all the water in the oceans and everywhere else that we have, 98% of that is not usable for us as humans. Only about 2% is a fresh water supply, and 75% of that is locked up in glaciers in areas such as Alaska, in Iceland, and of course in Antarctica. So it's a very precious resource that we have available to us, and it's difficult to see it starting to retreat. It's good to be impressed by it and go home with the idea that this is something that really must be protected.
To me, Glacier Bay is its wildness at its prime. It's a place where you can go and not see even a kayak or another person for days. And you can be 65 miles from any sort of road. You can be in the middle of nowhere and feel at peace with everything. So that's kind of how I feel when I'm out here. Yeah.
Well, of course, your day in Glacier Bay is different from anyone else's, but it is that very unique combination of beauty, its history. It is planet Earth in action, and it's just so damn pretty. And we see such a wide variety of things that are happening. You can watch for the birds, you can watch for the calving of the glaciers, you can just sit back and let the world go by and be reminded of what a truly beautiful experience planet Earth really is. That's my Glacier Bay experience.